Welcome back to the conclusion of License to Legacy Goldeneye. I'm host Javi Trujillo, and joining me once again is Mr. David Leigh from the James Bond dossier. How do you do, David?
Hi, Javi. I'm doing well.
And of course, we have Bill Koenig of the Spy Command here also. How are you today, Bill?
I'm okay, Javi. How about yourself?
I'm doing all right. I'm bracing for some cold weather that's fast approaching.
Cold weather's arrived where I live already, so...
It's been a couple of weeks, actually, since we talked. How were your gentlemen's respective holidays? Did you have a good time off?
I enjoyed the time off. It was a bit of a shock to try and go back to work afterwards, yeah.
It was fine. It was good.
What about you?
How was your time of the world?
Well, other than really cold, it's been good, so...
All right. Yeah, it's... I wouldn't say it's been relaxing, but it's been very satisfying. So... we're going to jump right into it. Our GoldenEye discussion has gone through many different topics, and while just to briefly recap what we talked about, I don't think GoldenEye is anywhere near our favorite Brosnan or Bond films, but that doesn't negate the fact that it's been extremely influential going forward. And one of, if not the biggest legacies of GoldenEye is the Nintendo 64 game. It was released in August of 1997 in the US and Japan, and it went on to catch the gaming world by storm, becoming the third best-selling N64 game at over 8 million copies, behind Super Mario 64 and Mario Kart 64. So it revolutionized first-person shooters, and its multiplayer mode caused countless hours of lost sleep. In fact, it set the bar so high that most Bond games have been chasing after its popularity since. The name has even been trotted out to recapture some of that lightning in a bottle with GoldenEye Rogue Agent, where you are the villain with an electronic GoldenEye working for Octopus, not Spectre, and has been remade twice, starting in 2010 as GoldenEye 007, and then in 2011 as GoldenEye Reloaded, now with Daniel Craig instead of Pierce Brosnan. So I'd argue that the PS3 version is the last great James Bond game. And like I said, that was 2011. It's 2026 now. So the original even got remastered and was made available as a download for the Xbox and Nintendo Switch in 2023, to which Alec Trevelyan has asked, why won't you be a good boy and die? Have either of you played any iteration of any GoldenEye game?
No.
I have not, admittedly. The only I'm not a gamer. The only video game I played was the From Russia with Love remake, where they had Connery do the voice, and it was kind of an odd thing because you had young Connery in appearance and old Connery voice. But as you said, GoldenEye kind of set the standard for Bond video games.
Yeah, that I appreciate that he came back and did that. But when you compare because a lot of the dialogue was lifted straight from the film, the difference in his voice tenor, from the 60s to whenever that came out, the late 2000s.
I think it was more like 2005, maybe 20 years.
I think it was after Rogue Agent, but my memory may be a little fuzzy on that. But for me, it was, I never owned a video game system before. There was something my parents didn't allow for me growing up. So by the time that the N64 came out, I had already moved out of my parents' house. I was 20 when the video game came out. And my manager at the time I'm trying to remember if he had the game or if he had the system. I think he had the game. He said he would give it to me if I bought a system. So it was one way or the other. So eventually I got my own Nintendo, and I don't know how many hours I played that game, and whether it was with friends or by myself, just replaying the missions over and over again. And there was something about it and the way that like the music. We touched on the Eric Serra score before, and I think while it's very unconventional, there's something about the video game copying that style of music. It somehow makes it kind of iconic just because of the repetition. Like, it has such a distinct sound, and the game reinforces that. And then the next game, Tomorrow Never Dies, which was like on the PlayStation, was a totally different feel and look. So when they did The World Is Not Enough, it went back to more of a GoldenEye formula with the first-person shooter, and it was basically a more polished version. But as I said in the preamble, like, it's been that lightning in a bottle they keep trying to recapture over and over in different styles. And you can argue about having Daniel Craig replace Brosnan in, the most iconic James Bond game, but there's a really good reason for that. And what impact do you think it had on making new fans? Like, obviously the games weren't for you, but we know people like Calvin Dyson who love Bond video games. What do you think that the role that this played?
Well, I think it's clear that a whole generation of fans was created by this game. It was game first and then movie second, and so people were introduced to James Bond through the games, which I find kind of incredible. But I don't think Calvin is the only person who it happened to, and so it was clearly a good thing for Bond.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. People who had little to no experience with Bond discovered Bond through that game, and they became fans of the franchise more generally.
I feel that it reinforced the iconography of Bond.
I don't know, because I've never played it. I beyond it being a first-person shooter, I don't really know anything about it, so I have no idea.
Well, it was based on the movie, and it's an offshoot of the movie. As we just said, a lot of the first-time players weren't necessarily familiar with the movie or the preceding movies. So I'd say overall it was fairly strong. I mean, from what I've seen of it.
I think the multiplayer mode had a big part of reinforcing the iconography because it allowed other characters that weren't in GoldenEye to be in the game, and other levels that, obviously weren't based on the movie. There was a Moonraker level, which did, for what it was, 64-bit, had some really great graphics, like doing Drax's hideout before they shoot off into space. And it had, at one point, there was supposed to be an option where you could be different Bonds, like look like different Bonds, but it never became a reality. It was just something that I think they'd worked in, but they couldn't get the likeness rights out. But it had characters like Baron Samedi and Jaws and Oddjob, who, weren't in GoldenEye, but became iconic because of either their visual, like Baron Samedi, or Jaws, who was oversized, which affected how you would play the game, or Oddjob, who was shorter and was therefore kind of harder to kill. And he could sneak. If you were Oddjob, you could sneak up behind someone, and if you were playing like slappers only, you could just punch someone, and that was it.
All these people who came to watch the film after the game, though, they must have been disappointed to find these characters weren't in the film.
Hopefully they went to their video store or, Suncoast and bought like a Bond movie. It also introduced, not introduced, but it also featured the Golden Gun. So you would go around the level, and if you could find the Golden Gun, you could then shoot someone with it, and it would only take one shot, as opposed to having the health meter that would replenish or go down. One shot was it. So it was a cool mechanic for the game. And I don't recall if we talked about this when we discussed Omega, but I had a tie-in watch because in the game itself, you can go to the main menu and you do that, and it pulls up like what looks like your watch, and you can see your health meter around the bezel. And there were holograms which let you use whatever gadget you wanted, but they had a tie-in watch that had a hologram 007 logo on it, and it tried to reenact like your health bar on it, which I know quite a few people around my age were trying to get as a collectible. But so it wasn't just the fact that it was Goldeneye; it had other aspects of Bond that it was incorporating into it that just help reinforce the brand as a whole, and it's something that created such a popularity among that generation. Like, it's been really unfortunate that as a video game franchise, it's been fallow for so long. So it remains to be seen what First Light is going to do, but I would hope that maybe it captures some of that lightning in a bottle. And for me, in that what seemed like a really long wait at the time between Goldeneye and Tomorrow Never Dies, which really it wasn't, or between Tomorrow Never Dies and The World Is Not Enough, I played that game constantly. And it was something to keep my love of the franchise going when we were in a time where we didn't have social media or influencers who were always talking about Bond. There weren't podcasts talking about Bond. You were locked into revisiting the books and movies. And not that that's a bad thing at all, but it was something to keep you active in your fandom at the time, was playing the new Bond game, something to be excited for, a new adventure in a time when actually we were kind of in a golden age of stuff coming out. But as we kind of wrap up our conversation on Goldeneye, I want to discuss Pierce Brosnan. After losing the role due to his Remington Steele contract in '86, he was announced June 8th, 1994. And Goldeneye is obviously his first Bond film. And after so long a gap, if audiences didn't like him, would we even still have Bond movies being made? Like, what's Brosnan's legacy as the character?
I'd say his legacy is the fact the franchise carried on. You try to tell fans about this today. Bond really was in a precarious spot in 1994. The studio, MGM, had mixed feelings. There was one faction that wanted definitely to carry on with Bond, another faction that was very skeptical that Bond's time was done. The faction that wanted to carry on won out, but it took some doing. And also, I remember when Brosnan's casting was announced, and I mentioned this in a preceding installment, the Wall Street Journal had this big front page article, and it kind of walked you through, some of the other actors that had been talked about. And, Bond was not a sure thing in the summer of 1994. It just wasn't. And again, you talk to fans say, "Oh, Bond will be around forever," but it was kind of a toss-up whether it was going to happen. So, for whatever reason, Brosnan clicked with the general audience, and I know I see even today some fans, make fun of Brosnan. They call him Braza. Oh, there's Braza's pain face. I see a clip from one of his films, but he did a lot to get the franchise going. His casting, anyway.
Is Braza a slander? I always kind of took it as a term of endearment.
When I've seen it, like on message boards, it seems to be pretty.
I always assumed that it was a term of endearment as well.
Pain face, no. I've seen people mock his pain face, especially when we were in the throes of COVID and how often he touches his face. And that was one of the big things, is don't touch your face.
Maybe I just look at the wrong message boards and stuff. Because it's usually in the context, here's Braza and his pain face. They link the two.
David, what do you feel is his legacy?
His legacy was that Bond continued. It's without Brosnan, we wouldn't have had the Daniel Craig era. I think he was a very likable Bond and a very popular Bond at the time. It's just, I think that he was let down with the films, that the writing wasn't strong enough for him. I think he would have done it a lot better in a different time with maybe more experienced producers. I'm not really sure, but certainly I think the material he was given wasn't up to him as Bond.
Yeah, if you look at like press junkets and interviews with him at the time, he was always trying to push to bring more depth and a little more serious and some characterization that seemed like it maybe fell on deaf ears.
Mm-hmm.
Something he had to fight for, and something that Craig was handed to him.
If you look at Playboy magazine in 1999, they had a long interview with Brosnan. And that was one of the places where he lobbied for the gadgets are getting taken over and stuff like that. Look at his comments and then compare them to Connery's comments to Playboy magazine in 1965. And the two interviews are very similar. In both cases, the actor is thinking, the spectacle's getting away from us. We need to kind of rein it in, and wanting more drama and more ability for the actor to act. And it's something he wanted, and he, for the most part, did not get. He got a little bit of it in The World Is Not Enough, but then the very next movie, you had Die Another Day, where they were like going, there were little snippets of acting, but you also had invisible cars and stuff like that.
For me, I pretty much loved his Bond, right out of the gate, and he hit the mark. Some would call him as a pastiche, but I just appreciated how he had elements of Connery, he had elements of Moore. He tried to bring in some of the Fleming characterization at times, and to me, he was like the ultimate Bond. And I really didn't know how they were going to replace him, just because I thought he was peak. And there's it seems like this is algorithms talking, but it seems like there's a growing segment on like Instagram and Facebook who feel like Bond ended when he left the role. There's like this growing dismissal of the Craig era because of how it ended. And so,
yeah, it's funny that, because, obviously when Craig was announced, there was the whole pushback against him with, Craig not Bond and all of that. And then the tabloids were going for him during filming. But after Casino Royale was released, that criticism shut up completely. It just disappeared. And we didn't really have any criticism of Craig and his portrayal of Bond until after No Time to Die. And now it's popped up again. And now it's, we should go back to Brosnan. And I find that interesting. And I don't really know what to make of it.
I feel like as social media started to become more of a thing around Skyfall and Spectre, I saw a lot of anti-Brosnan sentiment and how Craig was the ultimate and the best and peak Bond and the best since Connery, which every Bond, you'll find some review that said this is the best Bond since Connery. The Goldeneye trailers and TV spots are littered with quotes like that. But I think you're right, David. It was No Time to Die was that linchpin where the script flipped from Brosnan's awful, Craig is the best, to, Craig is horrible and Brosnan was the last great Bond.
Yeah. And where did all these people suddenly appear from? It's just like, did they suddenly get new social media accounts?
Well, I think there's a tendency, and this is I'm basing this on anecdotal observations. It seems like when the new Bond gets established, a lot of criticism gets transferred to his predecessor. And so when Craig was kind of at his peak of popularity, Brosnan, he was a hack. He was, I mean, this is just stuff I've seen on message boards and social media. And now that Craig is gone, although it's kind of the long goodbye in the sense that, that we don't have a new Bond yet. But, now it's like, Craig, oh, man, he's just this and that. Boy, I mean, I just think there's a kind of tendency with that. And so, like, it's like, okay, you become a hit, and then there's the reappraisal, and then the new guy comes in, and the reappraisal of the predecessor intensifies. And then at some point, people are kind of take a deep breath and will probably reappraise Craig again, after the new guy is out. I mean, we'll see, but I mean, there's just some of it, I think, is human nature. That's my guess.
I am still flying the Brosnan flag over here. Maybe his movies aren't the best, but when it comes to, like, I just want like a comfort food type of Bond. Like it's easy for me to throw on Tomorrow Never Dies or The World Is Not Enough, and just it's that warm fuzzy blanket of that formula Bond that they established in the 60s.
I'd also say, as an ambassador for the Bond franchise, he was way better than Daniel Craig. I mean, Daniel Craig, whenever he was interviewed, or whenever I saw him interviewed on TV, it'd be effing this and so on, and I swear a lot as well.
Is one of his favorite phrases.
Yeah, I swear a lot as well. So I'm not criticizing him for that, but it's just the way that Bond comes across. If you've got somebody doing that, I think Brosnan was, he was a fantastic ambassador for Bond.
Well, and Brosnan clearly liked being James Bond in movies. Now he would have liked some more dramatic flourishes and stuff like that. But there was no question that he loved doing James Bond movies. And with Daniel Craig, I think I think Craig had a dislike of the publicity part of it. He enjoyed the acting part of it, but but when you're the cinematic James Bond, there's a lot more to it than acting, and you've got to do all this publicity and stuff like that. And I don't think Craig particularly liked doing that stuff. But even though they gave him more responsibility and more power than any other cinematic Bond before him. He got the co-producer title, and they seemed to, whatever you want, Daniel. What do you want? We'll give it to you. But anyway, like I said, Brosnan relished doing James Bond, and I think it showed, and I think people reacted to that favorably.
The fan element, like his fan story, I think, which they touted, from the start with Goldeneye, of moving, and his first color movie in the cinema was Goldfinger, and what an impact that had on him. Like that carried a lot of weight with me, as someone who's loved Bond since he was a child, and just from all accounts from people that I've heard, like he's just a good guy. He was out here, oh my gosh, 7 years ago now, 8 years ago, filming a show for AMC called The Sun, which is about someone from Texas. So he would be posting pictures all around, him doing stuff in Austin. And one day I got to see him ride his bike. We waved to each other on the trail. And one of Brooke's regulars from where she works was in film production, and he was towards the end of his career, like being crew, and was being very particular about what he worked on. And he said the only reason he came back to work on the second season of The Sun was because of Brosnan, of what a class act he was, and a gentleman, and holding doors for people, and that just the mood and tenor he set for the set was so positive that's why he wanted to work on that show again. So,
well, and also with Brosnan, there were just all these connections his wife had been in For Your Eyes Only.
Yeah,
he had the thing where he had the offer, he even signed the contract, but then the network that ran Remington Steele on something like the 56th day of their 60-day option exercised it, and that caused Brosnan to lose it. I mean, but like, at least I can only speak to the American audience, but like there was this anticipation that once Roger Moore was done, it was going to be Pierce Brosnan. And there was one time he was on the David Letterman late night show, and Letterman had this sort of acerbic interview technique. He said, okay, all right, when are you going to be the next James Bond? And like, he's going, ooh, biting his lip because, it's like he can't say anything. I mean, this was before he had been formally offered it. But like, people in America anyway, very much wanted him to be the next Bond. And, and Letterman's like needling him about this. And like, he's like really uncomfortable, and I understand why. And then, it's almost as if, at least to his fans in America, he got cheated. So a decade later, or almost a decade later, he finally gets it. So I think there were at least some people in the American audience who were rooting for him, and there was just a connection there. And I remember when he was filming Goldeneye, there was this shot of him and Roger Moore. I think it was on the St. Petersburg exterior set, and it just looked really comfortable. Just, from a Bond fan's perspective, looking at that photo. Yeah, it
felt like a passing of the torch, that photo.
Yeah, very much so.
Martin Campbell directed his first Bond movie and was so successful introducing a new Bond that Eon had him do it again 11 years later. What impact has he had on the franchise with his hard-hitting style?
Well, I would say Campbell very much kind of modernized, at least at the time, sort of the visual style. The camera moved a bit more, whereupon the camera was very stationary with John Glenn and his predecessors. So I think, it was one of those things. I think he was just the right guy at the right time.
And that was coming off of John Glenn, who had done the last 5 movies. It was a bit of a shift in style and what we were used to seeing. David, what do you feel? What impact did he have restarting Bond twice?
I'm not really sure for me, because the film that for me he was much more successful with was Casino Royale. With Goldeneye, I mean, maybe it's not his fault so much. There are still far too many comedy elements in it for me, and so I struggled a bit with Goldeneye because of that, and so I don't know. I don't know is my honest answer.
It's funny, as you get older, you can appreciate things or analyze them in a different way. And there's a lot more that I picked up on in the style of Goldeneye that I didn't see when I was 18. But after Casino Royale came back and I came back to look at Goldeneye and compare the two, like you can see some of his flourishes, like you mentioned, with certain camera movements and dramatic angles. But I was surprised as, we got the second round of DVDs, like the Ultimate Edition or the special, I forget what they're called, with like the Lowry cut, where they had newer special features of stuff we hadn't seen before. Just how much yelling he does and swearing and at people that was a behind the scenes that we weren't really privy to back in the original like Laserdisc release. So it was interesting to see like what his style was on the set and the intensity that he brought to try and make things more lively, I guess, on screen. Finally, let's get to Cubby, Michael, and Barbara here. I want to talk about their legacy from this movie. Cubby, after overseeing 16 films to one degree or another, wasn't in the best of health. And while he was there to give advice and offer his opinions, he underwent a triple bypass and eye surgery in 1994, meaning he had to convalesce in LA during filming. What impact did it have going forward as Michael and Barbara assumed the reins?
Well, I think, Cubby's last big decision was deciding to go with Brosnan. It was a decision made under some duress. The studio wanted Brosnan. They did not want Dalton. Broccoli, basically, in the end, was a pragmatist and said, all right. Yeah, I talked about interview with Jeff Kleeman, a studio executive, and he described the meeting. And finally, they were all in the meeting, and Cubby kind of tapped his cane on the floor. All right, we're going with Pierce. And, and then after that, he handed it off to his stepson and daughter. And, really, and even though, Michael Wilson had been a key cog in the production machine since The Spy Who Loved Me, and Barbara had been working full time since Octopussy. But even despite all that experience, it's one thing to be a supporting part of the machine. It's another thing to be the machine itself. And they really had to go in the deep end, figuratively speaking, and they did so.
Yeah, and I think, considering that, I think they did a good job of it, but it took them a few films to really get going. It took until the Daniel Craig era, I think, for them to really step up and do what they wanted to do, and that really took picking their own guy as well.
Right, because also, even though Cubby was in ill health and he passed away in, 1996, Dana, their mother, Dana Broccoli, was still around and still kind of, she was always kind of the power behind the throne. And, so I don't think they really felt they could go totally their own way until after she passed away. I believe it was 2004. And, of course, it was after that, then we got, Daniel Craig. There was a quote from Michael Wilson about, we had to do something for ourselves. This was a story that came out when the casting of Craig had been announced. So the thing is, we've almost come full circle now, because Michael and Barbara have now yielded the torch, except they've yielded it to Amazon as a corporate entity, rather than a family member, but they've handed off the torch. And so now we're in the early days of an era not unlike that of the development of Goldeneye.
And touching on that, we had the gap from 89 to 95, and now we're in this gap of 2021 to, I'm really hoping still 2027, but probably 2028. What is that? Yeah. What does that gap portend for Bond 26? Like, do you feel like, is history repeating in a sense? Like, is Goldeneye the reaction and reception and what they have to accomplish with Goldeneye, is that something we're going to see again for Bond 26 or Amazon 1, whatever you want to call it?
I don't think we're in exactly the same situation because of social media. And so I think that probably the active fan base is much larger than it was in 1994, 1995. So I don't think they're really going to struggle to get Bond going in the same way. And I don't really think that there is the risk that the next Bond film will be successful or not. I think that's pretty much guaranteed, because I think it's clear within fandom that there is a thirst for a new Bond film. That where there is the parallel, though, is that we have got different people in charge, and so their approach to making the new film is going to be quite different to what happened before. And, it probably to a much larger extent than with Goldeneye, because there's no clear sense that we're going to get any continuity of any of the people who work behind the scenes on the previous Bond films.
If the Broccoli's were still in charge, I would almost assume that we would go back to more of the like the early cinematic flair and more of a traditional, Bond on a mission and the formula. Just because we did it, Bond has always seemed like it's been kind of like a pendulum. Like they go one way, then they hit that extreme, then they swing back the other way. Moonraker, For Your Eyes Only, Die Another Day, Casino Royale. But really, there's no reason to expect that given the new, as you said, having Amazon in charge. Well, at least, from what I'm seeing, it seems that people kind of want to get back to cinematic Bond basics. So it'll be interesting to see if Goldeneye serves as a template for reintroducing Bond to a new generation, because it's weird to say this. My daughter's in college now, and the only James Bond actor in her lifetime has been Daniel Craig. By the time Brosnan came along, he was the third actor in my lifetime who was Bond. Well, 4 if you count Connery coming back for Never Say Never Again. So that's it's going to be interesting to see what, if they look back at this movie is for any kind of influence or reference. Bill?
Well, I was about to say the other thing with the next Bond movie, you have 2 producers who were hired by Amazon, David Heyman, Amy Pascal, but they're only committed to this one movie. Now, maybe they'll come back. I mean, I get the impression right now that they're just trying to do this one. And
yeah, I would assume it's let's see how it goes. And then if you do a good job, we'll keep you kind of thing.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, if you look at, say, Batman, movie since 1989, there are different producers. I mean, it's very much a studio run franchise. But yeah, different producers. So it's the whole thing with Eon and the Broccolis, that was a very unique thing, and it's done now. And so it's not going to be the same. Yeah,
it's a brand new playbook. But that is our Goldeneye License to Legacy conversation. It's still very weird to me that it's been 30 years since this movie came out. And like I said at the start of this episode, like it's not my favorite Bond movie by any stretch, but it holds a special place in my heart because of introducing a new Bond and, the first film in 6 years. And I feel like the sum of it is greater than the parts, if that makes sense. So
whatever you think of it as a movie, it's one of the most significant movies in the history of the franchise.
Yeah.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well said. Where can people find you?
I'm at the Spy Command, hmssweblog.wordpress.com. I have other sites. If you go down the left side, there are links to those sites. So,
and you can find me at thejamesbonddossier.com and, various links, as Bill says.
And I am The Bond Is Not Enough on Instagram. And make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, where you can find the audio editions of our podcasts at the 007 Files, and also other video bonus content as well. So thank you all for listening. This is going to put a capper to our season 3, wrapping it up here with Goldeneye. But as always, the 007 Files will return. Take care.